Welcome everyone to today's training session. My name is Mike Fowler and I work in the Office of Financial Management. My responsibilities are for the fiscal monitoring of our grantees and for the reconciliations of our CFA reporting. And if you're new to PCCD, we hope that this presentation provides you with the insight into what it takes to manage your PCCD grant award. First off, I'd like to start out the presentation by sharing a little bit about PCCD's history. Next slide. PCCD was established in 1978 in order to support the justice system improvements. In addition to that, our mission was to facilitate the delivery of services to the victims of crime. In order to accomplish this, we partner with our agencies throughout the Commonwealth. And a vital part of that partnership is to provide you with funding. And that brings us to the purpose of today's training, which is to help you understand how to manage your grant funding. Next. This training will be broken down into 5 sections. They are getting started with your grant award, the reporting on your grant award, and the project modifications to your award, and the monitoring of your grant, and finally, the closing out of a grant award. Next. The goals of this training is to, again, to provide you with the knowledge and tools to successfully manage your grant. And it's to help you better understand the federal and state regulations and to provide you with samples of how to record and report your grant activities, and to provide you with an overview on what to expect during the life of your grant. Next. Part 1 is the Getting Started section with the grant management process. First, let's review the grant award signature page. This signature page is a sample of a signed agreement between PCCD and you as an agency. In it, it states that PCCD will provide funding for the program, and in return, you, the applicant, agree to follow certain terms and conditions in the document. Therefore, there are 2 areas that I feel are very important for you to understand. First, Section 6 lists the terms and conditions you agree to in accepting the award. And 2 of those conditions are that you comply with PCCD's subgrant conditions and to the applicant's manual. I feel it's very important that you read and understand how these 2 documents apply to your grant. Also in Section 7, under the funding details, you'll want to be aware what funding sources are being applied to your grant. In addition, you'll need to verify that if there are any restrictions on how these funds are expended. And if you have any questions on this, please contact your fiscal contact listed on the grant. And lastly, we want to show you how this training will help you in meeting those obligations. So now let's go into the Getting Started section of the training. In this section, the topics we will be discussing are setting up systems and procedures, the record keeping, your accounting system requirements, the time and effort reporting, and the procurement policies. Because most of this information is directly from DOJ's financial guide, which can be wordy at times, we're going to try to break it down into simple terms for you. The first topic is setting up systems and procedures. Next. In this area, agencies must have financial management and internal controls and time and effort policies and procedures. Next. Regarding financial management. Next slide. Oh, yeah, that's fine. Regarding financial management, it's been asked, what's the difference between financial management and internal controls? And the best way I can describe it is that financial management are the activities that are aimed at controlling the conduct of an organization in order to achieve their goals and objectives, whereas internal controls, they're written policies and procedures that are in place to ensure those goals are being met. For example, PCCD Grants Management's division is set up and staffed to approve and monitor and track grant award funding. And as a result, our policies and procedures have been written to ensure that we are meeting those goals and objectives. And once the financial management and internal controls are in place, they will help to ensure the following: that the funded programs will achieve their intended results, that resources will be used in a manner consistent with the funding agency's mission, and that programs and resources will be protected from waste, fraud, and mismanagement. Next. This is for internal controls. Next slide, please. Oh, yep. An adequate financial management system, has strong internal controls, and there are written policies and procedures that are established that allow you to control your grant funding. They seek to guarantee that reliable and timely information is available for the use in management's decision making. Next. Part of the internal controls is that you maintain an adequate record-keeping policy. Some of PCCD's record-keeping policies are that you keep accurate, up-to-date records, and that you retain them for at least 3 years after the final fiscal and program reports are submitted, and that your records should match exactly what was submitted into e-grants. And in addition, that your record keeping should be set up to segregate PCCD grant income and expenditures from all other income and expenditures. Next. Also, part of the PCCD requirements is that you maintain an adequate accounting system. Some of the highlights of those requirements are: the accounting system documentation must be able to identify revenue and expenditures for each PCCD grant separately from all other revenue and expenditures, and that the accounting system records should identify the receipts of funds from all sources and be summarized in the cash receipts journals. In addition, the disbursement of funds should be identified by the payee expenditure type and summarized in cash disbursement journals. And last, that the subgrantee is also responsible for establishing and maintaining an adequate system of accounting and internal controls. And next up is an example of a good accounting system reporting. In this example, the agency has reported on a quarterly basis for 2 years. And now the grant has ended. And looking at their final accounting for the grant, which their chart of accounts, we can compare it to what was reported into e-grants. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see what was reported into e-grants. And if you notice, they're broken down by categories, but the total amount is $125,000. And so if you can go back to the last slide, it's exactly the same amount. These are broken down. The categories will be summarized, but they're broken down exactly. If we add up benefits and the travel individually, they'll be broken down exactly as they were in e-grants. Next slide, please. And this is a good example of a good accounting system. Let's go to the next slide. I'm sorry. All right. Slide 16. Okay. Just to recap, I wanted to recap what we discussed already, and that was setting up the systems and procedures, the record keeping, and the accounting system requirements. And next up, I want to discuss about the time and effort reporting. Okay, next. Next one after that. For personal expenditures, time and effort reports or timesheets are required. There are 2 different types of timesheets that may be required. There's one for employees working on more than one activity and another for employees working on a single activity. But first, we'll discuss a timesheet for working on more than one activity. The requirements state that they must be after the fact of an employee's actual efforts and they must account for total activity. That includes both grant and non-grant activity. Next. Timesheets must be signed by both the employee and a supervisor. And please note that the executive director and supervisor's timesheets must also be signed. The executive director's timesheet must be signed by a member of the board of directors. Next up is a sample of a completed timesheet. In this example, you'll notice that the employee was working on 3 different activities. PCCD's VOCA grant 30589 and funding sources 1 and 2. In addition, the VOCA funding in this grant allows the grantee to charge a percentage to their PTO hours. Next up is the employees who work only on a single activity. In some cases, you may have employees who work on only one activity. In this case, you'll fill out a time certification form. Here, it must be an after-the-fact certification that the employee worked 100% of their time on a particular grant. And please note, it must be completed every 6 months and be signed by a supervisor. Next, this is an example of a certification form for working on just one activity. And next up is our procurement policies. There are 3 methods of procurement that our grantees must follow. More than likely, you will adopt one of the first 2 methods. The first method is procurement by micro purchases. This is where purchases are less than $10,000. In this type of purchasing, you must distribute micro purchases equitably among qualified suppliers, and while competitive purchasing is encouraged, they may be awarded without soliciting competitive quotes if you consider the price to be reasonable. And the second method is procurement by small purchase procedures. This is where the purchases are between $10,000 and $250,000. When this type of procedure is used, price quotations must be obtained from several qualified sources, and you must also keep documentation on file to support, verify, and justify this competitive method of procurement. And please note, there may be instances in which only one bid or quote is received. For instance, a unique piece of equipment or a specialized counseling service. If this occurs, your quote or bid will be deemed to be a non-competitive procurement, and a sole source approval must be obtained. And please reach out to your fiscal contact listed on the grant for assistance. Next. The last method is procurement by sealed bids. In this type of procurement, formal advertising is required for items exceeding $250,000. In this case, bids are publicly solicited and a contract is awarded to the lowest bidder. And your agency must also maintain documentation on file that support and verify the sealed bid procurement procedures were followed. Again, please note, if only one bid is received, the same rules for non-competitive procurement will apply. This leads us to section 2 of our training. In this section, we will be discussing submitting quarterly reports, submitting interim reports, and fiscal and program reporting requirements. Next. Okay. Our first topic is submitting fiscal reports. These are some of the requirements of submitting a fiscal report, which I will be covering in an upcoming slide. But first, I want to walk you through the process of submitting a fiscal report. Next. Prior to entering a fiscal report into eGrants, you should have 3 items in your possession. First, you should have the accounting documentation to support what is being entered into eGrants. And remember, your record should match the eGrants reporting exactly. And next, you should verify that your submission is within the perimeters of your budget. For example, if you didn't budget for travel, you can't arbitrarily enter travel expenditures into your report. And last, you need to maintain supporting documentation for the expenditures you're reporting. Examples are timesheets, invoices, accounting records, etc. Next, we're going to walk you through the actual submission. Next. As I mentioned before, I said you must have accounting documentation to support your expenditures. In this example, this is the list of GL accounts for grants 36719. Next. Oh. From the GL account, we're going to take this information and enter it into our eGrants reporting module. Right here, we created grant number 36719 to walk you through an example. Would it be entering that in 36719? And in this example, I want to go through and I want to view this as an applicant agency, and that's what how you'll be entering your reports. And so here, what you do is you click on to enter a fiscal report. And right here from that information that I showed you before, we're going to create a fiscal report. We're going to do it for a period ending 12/31/22. And this is a quarterly report of how we enter it. And from the information that I had from that documentation, we're going to enter in the personnel expenditures, which we said for the director was $3,500. And we're going to enter that in, and then we're going to enter in for the counselor 4,000 from our account that we had. And then we're going to save and continue that. And then we're going to enter in their benefits that we had from our accounting records. So you see that both showed up, those for personnel costs, and now we're going to enter the benefits, which was $1,000 for the director and $1,250 for the counselor. So we're going to save that. And then we had supplies, which we're going to enter that in, that amount to 1,000. It was for programs. No, we were $500 for programs, I'm sorry. And then we had other costs, indirect costs, which were $1,125. That brings our total. We had I'm sorry, forgot to enter the computers. We had computers for $1,000. So that brought our total amount to $12,375. And that's what was in our accounting documentation. But what I want you to note is that we have to put in the expenditures for this quarter. We have to do our matching where the funds are going to be drawn down from. And on this particular award, it was all federal funding. So it has to match what our total amount is for our expenditures. So in this case, we're going to go $12,375. We're going to save and continue, make sure that took. And now then, so the funding has to match the expenditures. And in this case, it does. And now we're ready to submit this. And then it's going to ask us for a couple of validations after we submit it. Are you sure you have no outstanding sub-grantee obligations to report? And we're saying yes. Okay, we do not. So, and then it's what, do you agree, to the best of my knowledge and belief, that this report is correct and complete? Yes, we do. So we agree to that. Now it's submitted, and then your fiscal contact will go out and pick it up and approve it or send it back to you. And that's how you walk through a fiscal submission. Now we're going to go into our interim fiscal report. Next. Submitting an interim report is done in the same manner as filling a quarterly report. This report can be filed anytime during the quarter, but not in lieu of quarterly report. The two main reasons for filing an interim report are to correct an error on a previous fiscal report or to file more frequently for cash flow purposes. And again, I'm going to take back over the screen and I'm going to show you how to create a interim report. So right here, I'm going to back completely out of this and we're going to come back, start over on an interim report. Went into the same grant, wanted to view how you're going to be viewing it. And then we're going to enter another fiscal report. We're going to just do the same thing, create a fiscal report, but the only difference is going to be right here. It's going to be an interim report and not a quarterly report. So we will enter an interim report, but it cannot be on a quarter ending. So you have to go into here and you could put it the day before or anytime before the quarter ends. I personally like to put it back towards the beginning of the quarter so that in case you had any other changes, but let's put it back into January 2nd, we'll put it. And we'll write it right there. And again, so right here, if we're filing an interim report, we can go ahead and enter this amount in. And if let's say you had some supplies that you forgot to enter, you could put $1,000, another, let's say $1,500. We're going to save that. And again, now we got $1,500. We have to put that we're going to be drawing down or submitting for drawdown, that one. And so I just want to save and continue to make sure that it took. Yes, they match. And so I'm going to submit this. Again, the validations are going to come up. If they're correct, you agree to those. And now you not only have your quarterly report, but you also have an interim report submitted. And that's how you do both the fiscal and interim reporting. Our next topic is the reporting requirements. Regarding the fiscal and program reporting requirements, for most of our grantees, you will be required to submit your reporting on a quarterly basis. However, there are some instances in which our awards have different reporting requirements. If this occurs, it will be explained to you in the funding guidelines. And in addition, all reports are required to be submitted online through eGrants. And last, please note the fiscal and program reports are due within 20 days after the end of each quarter. And since these reports form the basis for further disbursements, it's essential that they be submitted on time. Next. Project modifications. During the life of your grant, there may be occasions on which modifications are needed to your budget or program. Some examples are changes between your budget categories, changes to purchase additional items, changes to the personnel positions, changes that affects the project's objectives or scope, or a change in dates of the project's duration. Next. If you're unsure as to whether a project modification request is needed, you should contact your PCCD Fiscal or program contact. Next. As part of the grant's financial management requirements, PCCD is required to monitor their grantees. Here, we are going to discuss the purpose of monitoring, how they are selected, and a sample of a monitoring request. First, let's get started out with the purpose of monitoring. The main purpose of fiscal monitoring is to ensure that the funding is being expended in accordance with the approved budget and that you follow the PCCD regulations and guidelines. In addition, we monitor in order to ensure that the project is implemented as described and is achieving the expected results. Next. How are PCCD's grants monitored? We randomly monitor them on a quarterly basis, and it's based on their risk level. The higher the risk, the more likely they will be monitored. Also, since new grantees are normally set at high risk, they will be also monitored more often. In addition, our grantees may be monitored if there's a significant program or financial concern. And finally, it's important that you're able to provide supporting documentation when requested. Next. And when you're selected for monitoring, here's an example of the request you can expect to receive. In it, it will list the quarter you're being monitored, the category that it's being requested, the grant number of your grant, and then the supporting documentation for the request, such as a cover sheet, accounting documentation, copies of invoices, etc. And please note, one of the most common things that hold up a monitoring being completed is a lack of accounting documentation. So if you want your monitoring to go smoothly, please be sure to include in addition to your other requested items. Next. Our last section is closing out a grant. Here are the steps to close out a grant. You prepare and submit a final fiscal report, a final programmatic report, and an inventory report if needed. You determine the cash balances and return unexpected funds to PCCD if needed. And you make all necessary accounting entries to close out the project's record, the project records. And regarding disposition of property, please refer to the applicant's manual for guidance in the disposition of property acquired in whole or in part with federal and/or state funds. Next. I'm going to turn it over to Chris and Sam for the frequently asked questions.
Great, thanks so much, Mike. So we wanted to cover some common questions and concerns that we hear typically from grantees across a variety of grant programs. So my colleague Chris Epica is going to be helping to answer some of these frequently asked questions. So our first is, if individual line items are under $10,000, what do I need to do?
Thanks, Sam. You don't need to do anything specifically as far as getting approved from PCCD. This is considered a micro purchase, and I'd encourage you to review our procurement guidelines and review specifically the micro purchase details within those guidelines, and reach out to the fiscal staff person assigned to your grant if you have additional questions. Basically, we're just looking for you to distribute your purchases among a reasonable number of different suppliers, and obviously get the best price and quality possible.
Great. So we heard the phrase sole source come up a little bit earlier in Mike's presentation. Can you explain what a sole source is?
Sure. And that's a good question. We get that fairly often. Sole source contracts are basically non-competitive procurement that where there is only one supplier that can fulfill the needs of the contract. PCCD must review and approve any such request before the organization making that request would actually. Sorry, can we back up? Yeah, I lost my train of thought.
It's okay. I'll start with thanks, Chris. So we heard the phrase sole source mentioned quite a bit during Mike's presentation. Can you explain what a sole source is?
Sure. And that is a question we get fairly often. Sole source contract is a non-competitive procurement where only one organization can fulfill that contract. A good example would be where where an organization came up with a copyrighted product and they are the only vendor that can provide that product to the grantee. Those types of contracts, sole source contracts, justification must be submitted to PCCD. PCCD must review and approve that before the grantee organization should proceed with actually making that procurement. And there are specific guidelines within the application and specific information that we'll request if you do have a situation like that.
Great, thanks, Chris. Another question we get pretty often is around checking accounts and whether or not organizations have to get a separate checking account. So, Chris, do you want to provide some insights onto that?
No, you do not need a separate checking account for our funds. However, PCCD grant funds must be able to be tracked separately from other funds. Revenue and expenditures must be able to be tracked separately from all other funds within the organization.
Okay. And Chris, is it safe to say that some of the accounting system pieces that Mike was covering earlier, that's kind of a critical component to being able to do that well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You should have a solid accounting system in place that is able to track different sources, not just PCC, but all your different sources of revenue and expenditure separately.
Awesome. All right. So another question is, I received bids prior to my project start date. Do those bids still count, or do I need to do new ones? So what's the answer there, Chris?
Well, yeah, if you put a contract out for bid within a reasonable time frame, I'd say prior to the grant beginning, I would say we would still see that as a valid procurement, competitive procurement. We obviously would not want you relying on something that competitive bid that you put out, say, a couple of years ago. We would say that's probably a little stale dated. We'd want you to rebid that.
Okay, perfect. So for our FAQs continued, another question we get quite a bit is whether or not PCCD grants are reimbursement only. So Chris, what's the skinny on this one?
Yeah, that PCCD grants are paid by reimbursement. So as you heard, you early in the presentation, as Mike pointed out, you must submit fiscal reports at least quarterly. PCCD staff will review those reports, and then assuming they're approved, we'll make a payment based on the amount of expenditures reported in that quarterly report. And Mike also showed you the ability to submit reports more frequently. We have quite a few agencies that submit monthly, and that generally helps alleviate some cash flow issues that those organizations may have with waiting for payments on a quarterly basis. So you can shorten that up by doing interim reports. And if you have any questions about how this works or what Mike showed early in the presentation, please feel free to reach out to the fiscal staff person assigned to your grant, or you can email the email address on that screen.
Cool. Do vendors all need to be registered with the Commonwealth as part of a grant?
No. The grantee organization does. That's how we, PCCD, will make payments to you as the applicant and the awarded grantee. Any vendors within the grant project that the grantee will be paying does not have to be registered as a vendor.
All right, so we're heading to our last FAQ slide. Although we certainly know there's a lot more questions that folks might have. So again, always encourage you to reach out to your fiscal staff member if you have any curiosities or things that aren't covered here. But one other question we get quite a bit is whether the organization needs a UEI number. So Chris, what is a UEI number and how do you know if you need one or not?
Well, UEI number is a unique entity identifier that for federal contracting purposes kind of recently took the place of the DUNS number. DUNS number used to be required as well. That's no longer required. But every organization that submits an application to PCCD is required to have a UEI number. And you can get that by going to sam.gov, sam.gov. And you can register for your number if you don't have one on that federal government website.
Sam.gov would also be a great nickname for me. JK. What if an item ends up going over 10,000, but it wasn't anticipated? Is this cause for panic? What should an organization do?
Well, if an item is over $10,000, I do want to stress that you don't necessarily need a kind of formal sealed bid unless it's over, the 250,000 mark. But if it goes over 10,000 mark, we would expect you to get multiple quotes from qualified vendors. If for some reason you're unable to do that, and it falls into the category of a non-competitive procurement or sole source, you would have to submit that request to PCCD. We would review it and ultimately approve or not approve it.
Great. That wraps up our FAQ section. Mike, we will turn it back over to you for additional resources.
Okay. Here are the additional resources that you can go out and obtain. And I just want to go over in there. These are links that you can just go into to get this information. On the applicant's manual, this is a must reference resource. It describes in detail all the information we discussed today plus more. And if you're well rehearsed with the information in this manual, you will be successful. And then the next one is the standard subgrantee conditions. Again, we discussed this earlier in the training. These are part of the conditions in section 6 of the grant award you signed. And I think it's good that senior management read it over at least once to make sure that you're in compliance. And the next one is the accounting system requirements. This is taken directly from the applicant's manual, and it describes what we spoke about today. And then the time and efforts reporting. This is a link to the time and efforts resources listed on our PCCD website. And there's a time and efforts reporting policy example on there. And as we spoke about earlier, the policies and procedures must be set up to guide your organizations and activities. And this is an example of a reporting policy. And in the completed timesheet that we spoke about, or that we showed earlier in the training, and there's also a timesheet template for you to use, an Excel timesheet template, and also the employee time certification form. That's on there also. Next slide. And then these two items are, this is a uniform guidance that is used. It's for the federal awards. And last is the Department of Justice Grants Financial Guide. And just a note on these last two resources, these are the two documents that PCCD follows in determining our grant management's requirements. And I believe that that concludes our training. And these are some more resources that are available at at the homepage. And you can also request assistance and information by reaching out to the PCCD Grants Management Resource account at the website listed. A big thank you for everyone that joined today.